Hello and welcome to the Outcomes Over Hours show. I'm Tina Patterson and I'm delighted with the guest that I have here today with me, who is Helen Russell. Helen is the Chief People Officer at Hubspot. And I love what she talks about in her bio, where she says she has global responsibility for the company's biggest asset, its people. And I love that philosophy, and I'm sure we'll get into it when we talk. Helen has also been the Chief People Officer or Chief Human Resources Officer at other leading companies such as Rivian, Sonos and Atlassian. And also, one of the reasons that I wanted Helen to speak with Helen today is that she really does see the link between having a great corporate culture, how it makes really good business sense. So Helen, welcome to the Outcomes Over Hours show.
Thank you so much, Tina, and thanks for having me.
Fantastic. Well, I'd love to start talking about mindset and culture, which I know are areas that you have deep expertise in. And could you share what are some of the specific practices or values that you think actually have the biggest impact on employee engagement and innovation?
I want to pick up on one of the things that you said there, which was mindset, because I think that's where we should start with mindset. And there's a brilliant quote that Henry Ford said, which was, if you think you can or you think you can't, you're right. And we had our top 300 leaders together a few weeks ago, and that's how we kicked off the session, by talking about mindset. And Yamini, our CEO, led that conversation, and really rooting everybody in the fact that it's your mindset that drives your assumptions drive your actions, and your actions drive your outcomes. And if you don't start with mindset, then all of those other things are going to be negatively or positively impacted. And so I'm a massive proponent of bringing the right mindset. And then, of course, that mindset determines the culture. How I show up each day, the mindset that I bring to my work every day is going to proliferate. And especially when we're in leadership positions, it sets the tone. Am I bringing optimism today, or am I bringing pessimism? Am I bringing trust today, or am I bringing suspicion? And so all of those things are things that are very top of mind for us as really the root of determining culture.
Oh, I love that. That quote that you mentioned, I also use that with my kids because I think it's such a powerful one, isn't it? Well, are there any things that that you would suggest for leaders on the days where they go, oh, I really feel I'm coming with the more pessimistic mindset, or that suspicion that you mentioned, of how can they practically reframe in the moment to be able to actually have that more positive intent?
Yeah, I think sometimes, I also love the saying, if you can't change the situation, change the situation. And I think sometimes when you show up and you're just feeling a certain way, that's when I always talk about it as my walk around the block. How do I need to physically change my environment in order to come back in with a different mindset? And having the awareness of knowing that you're in that place to then be able to do something about it. And so I think it's just having the awareness, checking it, and finding very practical ways that you can really shift your framing and come back with a completely different state of mind.
I love that. I haven't heard that saying before. If you can't change the situation, change the situation. So powerful. Fantastic. And one of the things also that we're seeing a lot more right now is this flexible work models. And I know that you're quite pioneering in some of the things that that you have done in this space, as well as how you think about it. Can you just share your lessons learned or the changes that you've observed, and particularly in the area of employee productivity? Because I still hear a lot of leaders say, well, if we're not 5 days a week in the office and I can't see you, how do I know you're being productive? So I'd love just your views as well as lessons learned in the space of flexible work models.
Yeah, and again, let's start by mindset. So if I'm going to say that unless I see what you're doing, I don't believe that you're doing it, then my starting point is a place of suspicion versus coming at it from a place of trust. And so what I would say is, what we doubled down on when we were together a couple of weeks ago was to say, we're starting from a place of trust. I'm going to trust that you're going to be doing the right thing for HubSpot, whether I can see you or not. That means the assumptions that I'm going to make is that you're driven, you're motivated, you feel really good about the environment, and you're going to give us your best product. The actions that we're going to take is to double down on how do we make the environment that you work in, whether it's in an office or at home or in a coffee shop, the best that it can be. And the outcomes then are hopefully you're more motivated, you're more engaged, you're more purposeful, and we get a better level of performance from you. So I think let's start with mindset, because I don't want to underestimate that. And I say that because I think the push to return to the office is the starting place is this place of suspicion, because I'm not seeing what you can do. The challenge, I think, and again, I don't pretend to know, because every business has its own idiosyncrasies and own sort of ecosystem. But the last couple of years from a macroeconomic standpoint have been challenging for most companies.
Yeah.
And so to take the last couple of years and have that be the determinant of whether working remotely or not is the right thing is really, really hard, because there are so many other variables, and most of those variables provided headwinds versus tailwinds. And so I think the safer bet is to at least give this a few more years of companies getting comfortable with this way of working and focusing more on outcomes, of having the variables provide more of a tailwind than a headwind, and also flexing the muscle, right? We did research way back when I was at Atlassian to look at those companies that were already remote and doing a really good job at being remote. What was different or unique about them? And what we found was the thing that was different or unique about them was that's how they'd started off life. They'd only grown up that way. Those that were struggling had grown up in office and were learning their way in to working in a remote way. We're all, for the most part, learning our way in to working in a remote way, because very few companies started off that way. And so what I would say is that let's give this more practice. Let's assume positive intent. Let's assume this very sort of trusting mindset, and provide mechanisms and structure and ways of helping our people be successful in that way of working.
Yeah, amazing. The word that comes to mind for me is unlearning, and adapting could be another way of doing it. But you're absolutely right that for a lot of us, what made us successful was the long hours in the office every single day. And to think that, well, that might have worked under those circumstances, but it's time to now adapt and to do things differently and learn different ways. It is a bit of a mindset shift, isn't it?
It's a huge mindset shift.
Yeah.
And also the fact that today we have 5 different generations in the workplace. Most of those generations have seen a world that was in office, but the emerging generation of the last few years have never experienced that world. Now, some would argue that puts them at a disadvantage because they don't know what practices and protocol and sort of cultural norms and behaviors look like. So that is somewhat to a disadvantage. But the advantage that they have is they've only ever worked this way. And so they're not hanging on to things that the rest of us knew to be true for, well, in my situation, for decades, right? We're having to unlearn those ways of working and just figure out how do we be successful in this type of environment.
Yeah, amazing. And so thinking about adapting, so adaptability is a word that we're hearing a lot more in terms of the importance for employees to be able to adapt to the fast-pacing change, but also, to your point, for leaders to be able to adapt to this different way of working, which is different than they had previously. So what advice would you give for leaders on balancing that of the more traditional ways that they have done previously, but also knowing that things are evolving, and with the next generation, their leadership requirements are probably a little bit different? What are the insights, or what advice would you give for leaders as they're grappling with these two different worlds?
Yeah, I mean, it's a hard one to answer, but if I was to take a crack at it, I think what we are all underestimating, even those of us that only ever knew this in-office environment, is, especially for those of us that had worked at any level of scale, we may have been in office, but we were spending an inordinate amount of time on Zoom or on calls because of working in this highly distributed, globally matrixed world. So if we were really intellectually honest with ourselves, wind the clock back 7 years and say, in any given week, how many in person with everybody round the same table actually happened on any given day? I would imagine it would be pretty small, pretty small. And yet we have very short memories that this sort of lingering memory is that we were just all high-fiving each other as we passed each other in the corridor 7 days a week. I don't know why I said 7 days a week, 5 days a week.
Yeah.
I've
Yeah.
worked in really intense environments. Maybe it felt like seven, but and of course that's just not true. We had to work and have had to work in a globally distributed world forever. And so I think it's how do you lean onto those things that made you successful in a globally distributed world versus hang on to those things that felt like were the lever that made everything work, which is those people that you saw every single day in the office. And as you know, at any company of any size and scale, you could be in an office 5 days a week and not bump into anybody because of you're spread over different floors, sometimes over different buildings. Not all cities can accommodate contiguous space. You may have office buildings spread throughout various different streets or campuses. And so I don't want to lose sight of the fact that very few occasions are you all physically sitting in the same location and chit-chatting about what you did at the weekend. And so that would be, I think we have selective memory a little bit.
That is a brilliant insight. It's reminded me of a leader who said to me, pre-pandemic, I was in the office 5 days a week, but my team were literally all spread all around the world. So even though I was in the office with other employees from my organization, all my calls were virtual because my team were virtual. So I think that's a brilliant insight for people to remember. And if you think about then the emerging workforce and where we are going, what are your thoughts on the leadership skills as such that leaders should be really focused on now to be able to lead their teams over the coming decade or so?
Yeah, I think in a world where we're very concerned about working in this distributed way, and am I going to have that same sense of belonging and being sort of on the team? I do think that it becomes a bigger ask of leaders and managers, irrespective of team size, to create moments of deep belonging. And that really is creating opportunities to understand what are the acquired and inherent traits of people on this team of mine that are like mine. Because again, research says that if there's a couple of people on the team that have acquired or inherent traits that are like you, then you are going to feel a deeper sense of belonging. So leaders have to be very aware of that and they have to create space for it. And they're not creating space in the same way with this physical getting together and creating community. And so again, what are the moments over the course of any given year where you pull your group together and the focus is actually more on building trust and creating community versus let's have a working session on, writing goals, all of which could have been done virtually. So be very, very selective and intentional about how you use in-person time versus how you use virtual time, and do the work that you can only do in person, and be really, really, focused on that. They will be the things that I think will be top of mind for me, Tina.
Yeah, beautiful. And then the final question that I have is, if you think about how the workplace is going to transform over the coming decade or so, are there any other areas that you see significant transformation or you believe that will be coming?
For sure. I mean, the world of AI is hitting us at a tremendous pace. And if we feel like working, out of the office is a disruption, wait till you're working alongside a bot or an agent or you're co-piloting with an agent and yourself. And I'm saying wait till it's already here. And so I think when I look at what's going to happen over the next 5 to 10 years, huge disruption coming in how we work, and really leaning on AI to fulfill some of the tasks and some of the work and allow us to work on higher order things. And I think that is going to completely change the face of what it feels like to be in the workplace and where we are all selectively spending our time.
Yeah, beautiful. I was listening to a leader talk about HI the other day, human intelligence, and how everyone's focused on AI, which rightly so, but also just that thinking, well, what are the things that only humans can do in the workplace also? And are we really equipping ourselves and our leaders with those skills to be able to lead, as you say, when, you know, your co-worker is literally a bot next to you as such?
Yeah. Again, judgment then becomes huge, right? Because the judgment piece becomes far more of a requirement of us to be able to make those calls when we don't have copious amounts of data and insights in which to be able to make
That's
the
a
call.
great point. Fabulous point. Well, I think that's a perfect place to end there in terms of a skill that leaders need also is really to think about their judgment, which comes in obviously with business acumen as well that they develop. So thank you so much for being on the Outcomes Over Hours show today, Helen.
Thank you so much, Tina.